In the heart of Ouagadougou, where desert winds sweep dust across the city's edge, stood a mountain no one knew what to do with: 12 million old car tires. For years, they were nothing but an ugly scar on the landscape. Towers of black rubber stacked in chaos, leaking chemicals into the soil and turning into breeding grounds for mosquitoes and disease. Most people saw trash. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré saw opportunity. Burkina Faso, a landlocked country of 22 million people, has battled food insecurity for decades. Farmers struggled against dry land, weak irrigation, and the harsh desert climate. As a result, the nation relied heavily on onion imports from Niger, Ivory Coast, and even Europe, paying high prices while local youth remained jobless. Yet onions are one of the most essential ingredients in African cooking. Traoré realized the answer was right in front of him: those very tires that everyone wanted to throw away. Food inflation had quietly turned into a weapon, stripping people of their dignity one meal at a time. But Ibrahim Traoré was not an ordinary president. At only 34 years old, he had proven himself as more than a soldier. He was a strategist. He understood that true power wasn't just in carrying weapons, but in giving people hope for tomorrow. And in the middle of Burkina Faso's struggle, he saw what no one else did: onions, growing inside old car tires. The idea sounded strange at first, almost laughable. When Traoré first brought it up, his advisors looked stunned. Some chuckled, some shook their heads. Tires and onions? How could a nation's food security rest on something so unusual? But Traoré was dead serious. He had already studied it. When old tires are packed with soil and stacked together, they transform into mini planting beds. They hold water longer than regular fields, protect crops from the desert winds, and stop precious soil from being washed away. What others saw as waste, he saw as a weapon against hunger. In places like Cuba and parts of Asia, small experimental farms had already shown that crops could thrive in old tires. But Ibrahim Traoré wanted to take that small idea and scale it up, not in the thousands, but in the millions. It was a bold gamble. The first pilot project began in Bobo-Dioulasso, Burkina Faso's second-largest city. Rows of discarded tires were cut, stacked, and filled with enriched soil. Farmers planted red and white onion seeds, watered them with drip systems that reused wastewater, and waited. The results shocked everyone. The onions grew bigger, greener, and healthier than those in open fields. Yield shot up by nearly 40%. Water use dropped by half. And pests? They could hardly touch the crops. Word spread quickly. Villagers who once laughed at the idea started hunting for old tires. Workshops were set up to teach communities how to cut, stack, and prepare them. Soon, entire neighborhoods smelled of fresh onion greens. Mothers sold baskets of onions in the markets, children watered the tire gardens, and jobless youth suddenly found new work. What was once a mountain of waste now became a symbol of rebirth. But for Traoré, this wasn't just about symbolism, it was strategy. He thought like a commander preparing for battle. One onion is not just one onion, he told his ministers. It is food. It is income. It is dignity. And if we have enough onions, we gain leverage. Leverage, that was the key. In West Africa, onions are more than an ingredient, they are currency. Every day, millions use them in soups, stews, and sauces. Prices swing wildly depending on imports. Traoré understood that if Burkina Faso could produce enough high-quality onions, it could not only feed its people but also dominate the regional market. By mid-2025, the results were astonishing. What started with 50,000 tires had grown into 12 million. The government even began buying waste tires from citizens for a small fee, turning trash collection into extra income. Farmers were given seeds and training, and soon onions that once cost 800 CFA per kilo dropped to just 300. In the markets of Ouagadougou, traders from Ghana and Ivory Coast lined up to load trucks full of Burkinabe onions. For the first time in years, Burkina Faso had a surplus, hundreds of thousands of tons each season. What many once mocked as a bizarre gamble had become a national triumph. The economy, once struggling, now carried the fresh scent of onions. Global media couldn't ignore it. Headlines in Paris, London, and Washington declared, Burkina Faso's Onion Revolution, from trash to treasure. Some analysts called it agricultural populism. Others, a stroke of genius. For Ibrahim Traoré, it was both. A shield and a sword. A shield, because food security meant fewer riots, less dependence on foreign aid, and stronger loyalty from his people. A sword, because exporting onions brought in hard currency, dollars and euros that could be used to fund bigger ambitions, including his controversial military modernization. Even China took notice, sending delegations to study Burkina Faso's onion tire farms. Western economists, though skeptical at first, were forced to admit it. Burkina Faso had achieved something unexpected. It had turned garbage into food security. But Traoré always played the long game. To him, onions were never just onions. They were about psychology, politics, and strategy. At rallies, he framed the project as the people's victory. These onions are yours. You planted them. You harvested them. And now, the world will taste the strength of Burkina Faso. In truth, it was his vision, his gamble, and his stubbornness that transformed ridicule into triumph. He had turned tires into tools, waste into wealth, and onions into symbols of sovereignty. Yet, questions lingered. Could this model be scaled across the Sahel, where millions of hectares of desert sat unused? Could other crops, tomatoes, peppers, even medicinal herbs, grow the same way? Was this just the beginning of a larger African agricultural revolution? For Traoré, the answer was simple. Today, it is onions, he whispered to his closest aides. Tomorrow, it will be the desert itself that we conquer. Under the blazing Sahel sun, the world had laughed at the idea that discarded tires could be the foundation of a nation's agriculture. But Captain Ibrahim Traoré pressed forward, laying the foundation of what history would later call the Onion Revolution. To most, 12 million waste tires scattered across Burkina Faso were nothing but a toxic burden, black rings of rubber that trapped rainwater, bred mosquitoes, and poisoned the land when set on fire. But Traoré saw something different. To him, they were self-contained planting beds, perfectly suited for a semi-arid country desperate to preserve water. His logic was simple but brilliant. Why beg the world for aid when the solution was already littering the streets? In the second phase of his gamble, the government passed a decree. Every tire collected by municipalities, garages, and villages would no longer be destroyed. Instead, they would be stored in vast, green warehouses. By mid-year, entire hangars in Ouagadougou, Kédougou, and Bobo Dioulasso were stacked wall-to-wall with old tires, guarded like they were reserves of oil or gold. At first, farmers laughed. Who plants onions in rubber? But then came the pilot projects. Agronomists filled the tires with a special soil mix, half desert sand, half compost from food waste. The results stunned everyone. The tires locked in moisture like natural wells. Onions sprouted faster, resisted pests, and needed 60% less water than traditional fields. In villages where dry winds normally scorched young seedlings, tire gardens stood like miniature fortresses. And politically, Traoré had pulled off a masterstroke. He silenced critics who accused him of focusing only on military defense by unveiling a civilian project of equal audacity. He answered the problem of youth unemployment by ordering every district to form cooperatives, groups of young people who would collect, clean, and prepare the tires. Thousands of young men and women, who might have drifted toward illegal migration or gangs, suddenly found themselves earning wages by building tire farms. This was more than food, it was national mobilization. The impact was immediate. International media reacted with a mix of shock and disbelief. Western outlets wrote headlines like, "The poorest nation in West Africa turns trash into onions." Meanwhile, Chinese and Indian agricultural experts quietly sent teams to study the model, wondering if it could be adapted to their own dry regions. In neighboring capitals like Niamey and Bamako, leaders were unsettled. How could Burkina Faso, under sanctions and constant financial pressure, suddenly export onions by the ton? Within just a year, convoys of trucks filled with purple onions were crossing borders into Ghana, Ivory Coast, and Senegal. Prices stabilized, inflation eased, and for the first time in history, the Sahel, a region once mocked as the land of famine, was setting the terms of onion trade. But beneath the headlines, Traoré's strategy was even deeper. By using tires, he reduced the need for expensive imported fertilizers and irrigation systems. He turned a waste crisis into a food revolution. Every tire bed represented sovereignty, food grown without foreign chemicals, jobs created without foreign loans. And he linked it to a powerful national story. If we can grow onions in the desert, why not tomatoes, peppers, or even medicinal plants? Diplomatically, onions became sharper than any weapon. When European envoys lectured him about democracy or aid, Traoré pointed to overflowing markets, to statistics showing food security rising, and to photos of women and children working tire farms instead of waiting in line for foreign handouts. It was nearly impossible to argue against a leader who had fed his people with their own discarded waste. Of course, challenges came. Transport bottlenecks, soil fatigue, even black markets for hoarding tires. But Traoré anticipated each problem. He introduced a national barcoding system so every tire bed could be tracked. He signed state contracts with cooperatives to stabilize onion prices. He invested in solar-powered dehydrators so surplus onions could be preserved and sold off-season. Slowly, what began as a gamble was transforming into an industry. To outsiders, it looked like a miracle. To Traoré, it was ruthless pragmatism. And the people felt it too. If onions could bloom in rubber, then maybe Burkina Faso itself could bloom in adversity. At first, the idea seemed bizarre. In the dusty streets of Ouagadougou, many whispered that their president was gambling scarce resources on a crazy experiment, growing onions inside old tires. Yet, within 2 harvests, critics fell silent. The tires created a protected microenvironment, they retained water, shielded roots from the burning sun, and even blocked pests. With minimal water, onions sprouted strong and resilient. Farmers who once struggled to coax out a few kilos from the sandy soil were suddenly harvesting baskets of fat, healthy onions.